Hi, I'm Charlotte and this is the Late Late Podcast. This is the first official podcast episode. I did do an intro episode a couple of days ago, just explaining my why I'm doing this podcast, why the Late Late Show. So if you want to go check that out, please do. But I thought before we dive into everything to do with the Late Late Show with James Corden, it's important to go back and talk about the history of the Late Late Show, how it came to be, the significance, the history, and pretty much everything that led up to James Corden taking the role. So let's wind the clock back to 1993, a pretty significant year. Bill Clinton was inaugurated as the president, the Waco siege happened in Texas, Nirvana released their final studio album with Kurt Cobain, Whitney Houston was topping the charts with I Will Always Love You, and David Letterman was hosting Late Night with David Letterman on NBC. This was weeknights at 12:30 a.m. Now, Johnny Carson had just retired from the Today Show on NBC, airing weeknights at 11:30 p.m. After a monumental career, a lot of people tipped David Letterman to take over the role as the Tonight Show host, after he manned the desk of Late Night for 11 years. It shocked a lot of people when they did choose Jay Leno instead. Even Johnny Carson had tipped David Letterman to take over him. So David Letterman knew his worth in this situation and he jumped ship over to rival network CBS. He took over the 11:30 p.m. slot and hosted The Late Show with David Letterman. Only 2 years later, CBS decided they want to challenge NBC in their 12:30 a.m. time slot, and in 1995, Tom Schneider was the inaugural host of The Late Late Show on CBS. CBS wanted something a little bit different compared to the other late night programs, and the Tom Schneider era focused a lot more on long-form conversation and less on comedy and skits. But by the time 1999 hit, CBS felt like they were falling behind in the late night scene, as the rest of late night was very energetic and comedy-filled. As the opposite to Tom's old-fashioned style, the Tom Schneider era ran for over 600 episodes at the time of his retirement. Now, Craig Kilborn was a much younger, fresher face than Tom Schneider. His experience included The Daily Show, so CBS wasn't really worried about his hosting skills at all. This was the first time that CBS had a more traditional late night show in the 12:30 a.m. time slot. He had a comedy monologue, he sat behind his desk for segments, he had guests come in and interview them, and he also had musical guests, and of course a house band, so again, very traditional late night format. Kilborn had a very unique hosting style, so he was arrogant, but sarcastic, but self-obsessed, and it was very much like a character he was playing, and this really intrigued a lot of people, but at the same time, it turned off a lot of people from watching him. In 2004, after over 850 episodes, Kilborn abruptly left the show. It really is left up to speculation on what really went down, but people say it was contract disputes with CBS, as well as the burnout of the 5-night-a-week schedule. With his sudden departure, CBS really scrambled to find a new late-night host as soon as possible. This brings us to the Craig Ferguson era, which started in 2005. I really remember this era quite fondly as a kid. I think it was the first time I was really kind of introduced to late night on the internet. Obviously not back in 2005, but when I got into my teenage years just before he kind of left, that's where I found a lot of Craig Ferguson. CBS originally hired him as a temporary replacement, but the audience really warmed to him, so it became a permanent fixture at 12:30 a.m. Now, Craig really made The Late Late Show his own and ditched the traditional format that they have seen in the Kilborn era, and completely different to what The Tonight Show was doing. There was no scripted monologue at the start, and he had very minimal writing staff. He did a lot of improvisation on his own for the opening. Craig had a sidekick who was a robot named Jeff Peterson that was voiced by comedian Josh Robert Thompson. And he on his own became his own cult figure in the late night world. Whilst Craig Ferguson's ratings weren't always the highest, he started gaining a cult following, particularly online when YouTube started becoming what it was today and people found his clips from around the world. Now, 2014 was a massive year, probably one of the biggest years in the history of late night television. It's probably one of the biggest shakeups we've ever seen across the board. Now, with David Letterman, an absolute icon, deciding to retire, CBS chose Stephen Colbert to take over the role. Now, Craig Ferguson had a clause in his contract saying that he is a guaranteed payout if he was not chosen to be the successor of The Late Night with David Letterman. He was reportedly paid out $8.5 million and left CBS voluntarily. I personally think this was the right choice, as I think Stephen Colbert was the correct person for the role, and I still believe that over 10 years later, it really brings the traditional format back to that 11:30 p.m. slot. I feel like Craig Ferguson is best suited to that later night role. It was a bit fun and a bit quirky, whereas again, the 11:30 p.m. time slot was very traditional and a lot more people tuned in for their news and a little bit of humour, where at the end of the night, Craig was kind of just like comedy and improv. Think of Craig as like the dessert after a main meal. Craig Ferguson finished The Late Late Show with over 2,000 episodes, the most out of any host in that time slot of CBS. Now this brings us to the main attraction, which is the James Corden era, which started in 2015. Obviously this podcast is based on this particular show, so I'll be going into a lot more detail in the next episode on how James was discovered, I guess, by CBS and why he decided to choose the job, the factors that played into moving his entire family from London, England, all the way to Los Angeles, California. I'll be talking about the marketing that went into it, the build-up, the reception that people had early, and I am really excited to get into the origins of The Late Late Show with James Corden. But I do think it's really important to bring up that CBS decided not to replace James Corden after he left the show in 2023. This is a move that kind of shocked the television industry in general, and the shift in late night television changed a lot because of this, especially the climate in the world, but not just America. I truly think that late night television is a dying art form, which again is why I've mentioned before, but I've decided to do this podcast because it was such a joy to me and so many people, and it was just such a staple in so many people's lives. And the fact that it is getting sensitized, restricted, and just getting pulled all together, I think was very important for me to kind of create a place to preserve the history. Again, especially in the world we live in now, I think it really came to a big decision for me to do something like this when Kimmel was pulled off the air for a few days to a week. That was like, I just felt like such a, I wouldn't say rage, but just, I felt like restricted almost. I felt like we're getting an art form taken away from us. So with this show doing what it did to the world, The Late Late Show with James Corden, I really wanted to, again, preserve this history as much as possible for this great piece of work, because I fear one day we're going to turn on the television and there won't be any 11:30 p.m. slot or 12:30 p.m. slot for something that was so major for so many years. So again, just to recap the history of The Late Late Show, Tom Schneider was the experiment, Craig Kilmore changed the format, Craig Ferguson had a cult era, and James Corden had the viral era. I'm really excited to discuss the viral era of the late night television show and how it changed the way late night television was and how it was marketed and who it was marketed to. It's kind of crazy how everything changed, and then it was so viral and then it just halted to a stop. Not because James left, but because CBS canned it altogether. But I don't think that anyone could replicate what James and Rob and Ben did on that show. Again, I just want to reiterate, I am not affiliated with CBS or anyone to do with The Late Late Show. I'm just a fan. I also want to put a call out at the end of all my episodes that if you have any questions at all, please DM me on Instagram. It's The Late Late Show Podcast, fairly straightforward. It will be linked below, and I will also have a Google form as well if you want to remain completely anonymous And not just questions, if you have if you went to the show, if you had an experience with the show, if you were in any way associated with the show, I would absolutely love to hear from you. I would really love to interview like anyone who was on the show in like no matter what capacity. You could be like the caterer, and I still want to like interview and find out what it was like behind the scenes, some stories that the audience might not know about. Again, I just want to preserve as much late night history from this show as I possibly can. I will also have a Google form linked below as well. That will be in my Instagram bio and in the description here. That is if you want to remain completely anonymous, which I totally understand. I will not share DMs on Instagram without permission. The ball is in everybody's court but mine. Everyone can have full control over what they say on this podcast or what I put out into the world. I'm really not expecting anyone to listen to this. I think I have like 0 views on my first, like 0 listens on my first one, which was like 2 or 3 days ago, which like totally because this is like so very niche, like so niche. But I really just hope that one day people can look at it if they fall in love with the show. Like some kid is just like in their room by themselves and they come across a clip on YouTube and then they go down a rabbit hole and then they just like fall in love with the show. So I really want this to be like a reference point if someone wants to like find out more. If they're like, oh my god, I watched Crosswalk the musical and I loved the costumes on there. Like I wonder what was going through the costume, like the head of costumes design, head of wardrobes design. And then there would be an interview if I ever like got the chance to interview someone like that. That would be like, that's like my ultimate goal with this, I guess. It's like probably nothing, but again, it's my passion project at the moment, and I've just been like diving deep into this and I love it so much. So if anyone has listened to us, I doubt anyone's ever got this far, but thank you. Even if like you don't say anything, if you don't comment, if you don't like, thank you for getting this far. I really appreciate it. Next week's episode, we're going to be talking about how James Corden got the gig of the Late Late Show, and who the fuck is James Corden, which was what was on everyone's minds at the time of this. So make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode. Bye guys.